पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. I'm grateful to be here. Now, I'm grateful that although I'm far away, I'm able to be of some service. So today we'll be discussing on the topic of the role of history in the Bhagavatam. So appreciating the role of history. We are coming in the 9th canto, where just now there was an elaborate description of the lineage, one king after another, after another, after another. So why does the Bhagavatam devote so much space? If you consider the perspective that Parikshit Maharaj doesn't have much time, only 7 days. So why give such a long list? So we will try to understand that in today's class. I'll take 3 broad points. First is, why is there so much history in the Bhagavatam? And second is, how history is shaped by conceptions of history. That means how history is pursued. Today we have a particular conception of history. And at the time the Bhagavatam was written, the conception of history was itself different. And that's why history, how history is recorded, what history is considered important enough to be recorded, that also changes. Now, beyond that, last point we'll discuss is focus on the path beyond history, not the path of history. Beyond history means we go beyond the material domain, where time exists and history actually occurs. Go beyond time, basically. Exactly which event happened when, how this happened, that is the path of history. So we focus on the path beyond history, not on the path of history. Let's look at this one by one. So why so much history? Well, the Bhagavatam is spoken to raise human consciousness, to provide resources for Parikshit Maharaj to absorb himself in Krishna. It is spoken by Sutta Goswami, the sages of Naimisharanya, so that Kali Yuga, with its dark effects of fixating, riveting human consciousness to matter, that effect of Kali Yuga can be countered. And not only Parikshit Maharaj's consciousness can be elevated and ultimately liberated, but even the consciousness of all of us in Kali Yuga can be elevated and liberated. So essentially, the Bhagavatam is not telling us history. It is telling us stories of times when the material and the spiritual met. What do we mean by the meeting of the material and the spiritual? The Bhagavad Gita begins with a radical differentiation between matter and spirit. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. Ubhayor api drushto jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. That those who are wise, they say there are two truths. There is matter and there is spirit. So differentiating. This is the body, this is the soul. That differentiation is essential for one's growth, for one's philosophical understanding at a basic level. But the same Gita, actually, as it moves forward, it talks about how later on, how the material can be used to access. Talking about when the material and the spiritual came together. Now, how exactly does this happen? There are many ways. When did this meeting of material and spiritual happen? One is, of course, when the supreme spiritual reality descends to this world. That is the various avatars. And so many avatars are described in the Bhagavatam. And of course, the avatari Krishna is described in the 10th canto. Then another meeting happens means the souls from this world, they go to the spiritual world. So when Dhruva Maharaj is going back to the spiritual world, at that time, also there is a meeting. because the Vishnudutas have come here. And to manifest vision, we see the Vaikuntha airplane. People saw the Vaikuntha airplane. People saw the Vishnudutas. That's another meeting of the spiritual and the material. Then beyond that, the souls who have attained spiritual reality are already very evolved. They are living in pure devotional consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness. They instruct about the path from material reality to spiritual reality. So Prabhupada called Narad Muni, for example, a transcendental cosmonaut. He could go anywhere in the universe and even beyond the universe to the abode of the Lord. So such a person, when he would come to the material reality, he himself would embody a link between the material and the spiritual. And then, of course, the Bhagavatam describes, apart from these events, apart from the history, that there is the Vishwarupa that is described, where Virata Rupa in the second canto, it comes again and again. How the so after Prahlad is relieved, rescued, and redeemed from the clutches of Hiranyakashipu, then the Lord tells him, you become the next king. So he tells him that you can rule the kingdom in such a way that is spiritually progressive. So you can guide even the demons on the spiritual path. So that is, so what the Bhagavatam does is, while it is describing cosmic history, it is describing, but it zooms in. There is a zoom in on certain phases in history. Just like imagine somebody is going in a helicopter and they want to photograph some wildlife and they're going over a forested area. And they suddenly see some movement. Maybe they're in Australia and they want to see some kangaroos. And they see something which looks like a Australian like an animal. Is it kangaroo? Immediately zoom in. Or they want to see some other smaller animals. So in the vast arena of the forest that can be seen from the helicopter, there is a zoom in onto the particular objects of interest. Similarly, within the Bhagavatam, there is a zoom in on two specific things. There is avatar and then there is uddhar. Avatar is the descent of the spiritual to the material. That is the Lord appearing in his various manifestations. And uddhar is the deliverance from the material to the spiritual. So that is what is the focus. And in this sense, what is happening over here is, when this particular sequence of kings are being described, there is no avatar coming immediately. And this is Kali Yuga. So as the Kali Yuga darkness is coming in, there's not much uddhar also happening. So because of that, there is like a fast forward. Or rather, we could say that there is a normal pace and then there is a zoom in, there is a slowdown. So the Bhagavatam zooms in or slows down to show us in greater detail what is happening at a particular time in history. Now, interesting, this avatar and uddhar, history is the arena of both. And that is why it is the Bhagavatam talks about history. Now, we may say, okay, if all these were not directly very spiritually evolved kings, then why even mention them? Isn't it just a distraction? Just say 21 generations after XYZ, then JKL appeared, something like that. Okay, it could be done like that. But the Bhagavatam is doing something significant. It's providing us transcendence in the context of matter. So it is, so by describing other events, just the names of the kings and their lineages, their successors, their predecessors, it is providing historical context for the events that transcend history. It's like, for example, we can make the description of a temple vivid by describing its vicinity. So, for example, if you say, oh, now this temple is particular, if we say, come to the Bhakti Center in America, in New York. Now we want to describe the Bhakti Center. Oh, it's so beautiful. But one way to describe it, just describe its beauty. But another way to give a greater feel to it is describe the contrasting environment, the surrounding environment. And as the contrast, this is such a spiritually sublime, uplifting place, and around it, There is the passion of the metropolitan place. There is the rush and buzz, and there is the buzz and buzz. There is so much contrast. So what happens? The speciality of that particular place, it becomes clearer when it is described in its geographical context. And similarly, what applies to geography can also apply to history. That means that the speciality of the appearance of the Lord, the avatar, or speciality of the deliverance of a soul, uddhar, that becomes more vivid, more clear when it is placed in historical context. So in one sense, these descriptions are so special because what's happening is they will show there's so much cosmic time passes, and in between, sometimes there is avatar or uddhar that happens. And then how special is that? So that's the first point. So what is the purpose of history in the Bhagavatam? It is a setting to talk about those times when matter and spirit meet, material and spiritual meet, and there is transcendence, there's rising beyond history. Now, yes, the Bhagavatam is describing history. But how is it describing history? To understand that, we need to understand first how our conceptions of history shape how we see history, how we understand history, how we write history. Let's look at them one by one now, the second point. So, broadly speaking, there have been two conceptions of time throughout history. So, there is the linear conception of time, which is the prominent conception of time in today's world, and then the cyclic conception of time. So, the cyclic conception was present in the Vedic tradition, and it is also present in the Greco-Roman tradition. The pre-Christian conception of time was very much cyclic. And it was from the time of Christianity, especially St. Augustine, he wrote The City of God. So he tried to fit in, he was one of the prominent persons. Now, there are others also who had somewhat linear conception of time, but he tried to try to readjust or reinterpret all of history to be culminating in the event of the advent of Jesus. And then after Jesus came and he went, then he says the arc of history is continuing toward the second coming of Jesus. So that is the idea of the linear conception of history. So this is so much ingrained. When Obama became the president, he said the arc of history is moving toward more and more justice, something like that. Now, of course, many people are questioning that. Is it really happening? Are we really progressing? Are we having a more equitable society, a more harmonious society? Some conceptions of progress have definitely been challenged. When the Soviet Union fell, they thought the whole world will become more and more democratic, and democracy and liberal democracy was the way for the world to progress. But there are many parts of the world which are consciously choosing or are having different forms of governments, and they're also, some of them are thriving. So this linear conception is so deep-rooted in the contemporary psyche that unless it is highlighted, we don't even think there can be any other conception of time. So the key point is that actually we don't see anything linear with respect to time in our day-to-day observations. So what we see about time is cyclic. So if you consider day, it's a cycle. From our perceptions perspective, we can say the sunrise, sunset. So, and then sunrise again, that's a day. In a month, the phases of the moon, from our current conceptions of geography, it is that a particular, it is the moon is going around the earth is going around the sun. So the time in which a moon goes around the earth, that is approximately considered to be a month. Now, of course, precise divisions vary based on the kind of calendar we adopted. But broadly, we see nature is cyclic. There's a waxing of the moon, waning of the moon. And similarly, we have fortnights. Year is also cyclic. It's the earth is moving cyclically around the sun. And more importantly, it's cyclic. We have Jan 1, and then we have go on till December 31, again Jan 1. So we don't see any linear conception of time in nature. Now, linear can be inferred from nature, or that can be, or it has been inferred. So, for example, the whole conception of evolution, that history is not moving cyclically, that history is moving linearly toward greater and greater progress. So that is an inference from history. Even Augustine, he also made an inference. Now, his motivation was, you could say, religious, whereas modern science, their motivation was more non-theistic. Darwin was not an atheist, but he was definitely not particularly theistic. So non-theistic, and later on it has become atheistic. So this is the linear conception of nature, time. Now, why is this? Good point Emily is making that. Thank you, Emily. That if we consider there's only one lifetime, then it's linear. You exist and you end. That's all that there is to existence. But if we understand the reincarnation worldview, then it is cyclic. We are born, we grow old, we die, and then we are reborn again. Krishna talks about this in the second chapter of Gita. Jatasya hi dhruva mrityur, dhruvam janma mritasya cha. One who is born is sure to die, and one who is dying is sure to be born again. Yes, that's also a good observation. Thank you. Now, what happens is that when there is a linear conception of time, then it fixates us at the material level. Or something new is going to happen, because history is moving in a particular direction. So something new is going to happen now. And that's why people get very excited. So therefore, everyone is excited about the material. So on the other hand, in cyclic conception of time, what happens is there's nothing new under the sky. Therefore, the focus is beyond the sky. Now, by beyond the sky, what I mean is the focus is on what can be attained beyond this world, what can be attained in the transcendental domain. That is a significant difference, and this has a huge impact on how history is noted, how history is observed. Now, this third point is a little more subtle. I'll just briefly mention it. I won't go into it because this itself is a whole class of linear and cyclic conceptions of time. It claims asymmetry in nature. Asymmetry in nature means what? That, you see, even those with a linear conception of time can't deny the fact that most of nature is cyclic. But what they say, that yeah, nature is cyclic, but human existence is not cyclic. Human history is not cyclic. So this idea of asymmetry with nature, within nature, is what has led to the idea of what has been called as human exceptionalism. Human exceptionalism is that human beings are completely different from all other species. Humans are exceptional. And now, of course, in the days of justice, there is this idea that this has led to speciesism. Speciesism is bias against other species, or say a special favor given to some species. So what is so special about humans? So they say, okay, everybody else is going round and round, but humans are special, and humans are progressing upwards. So now, the linear conception is not necessarily wrong. I'll come to that a little later. But it is linear conception of time applies not to human history, but to the progress of human consciousness. Tamasoma jyotirgama. Go from darkness to light. So it is not that the Vedas, the broad Vedic body of wisdom, rejects the linear conception entirely. It says, no, we humans are meant to progress. So human consciousness doesn't simply it doesn't cycle. Human consciousness is linear. Of course, linear doesn't necessarily mean it's always going upward. It can go downward also. But the exhortation, the natural aspiration of the soul is for the ultimate reality, Krishna. In that sense, while history, the arc of history might be going down, the arc of the consciousness of the soul can keep going upwards. And in fact, that is the purpose of Vedic wisdom. So we don't deny that humans are special, but it is not that humans are themselves special. In the soul has more developed consciousness in human beings. Otherwise, the souls in animals and humans are the same, essentially. just the opportunity for the manifestation of consciousness is greater. So now beyond that, now with respect to our discussion of the Bhagavatam here, when there's a linear conception of time, what happens is facts and figures become central. Why? Because they form the basis of events. Okay, when exactly did this happen? When exactly does this event happen? When exactly does this event happen? That focus becomes very important. Why? Because okay, A led to B. So exactly what was A? How did it lead to B? And B is a progression from A. So we want to know from B how will it progress to C. So when it's linear, it becomes very important. How exactly from one place to another place we went. See, if we are going cross country running, and if we are going, say, it's a marathon can be run cross country, and a person can be running a marathon, but it may be many laps around the same stadium. So what happens is, if somebody is going round and round on the same lap, then exactly what all happened in each lap doesn't matter. What matters is, are you moving forward? Are you moving forward? But if you're going in a path in a particular direction, okay, then how did you get from here to here? What exactly did you see here? What exactly did you see here? Well, that becomes very important in one sense. Again, this is a big fact. So in this case, what happens is, insights and values become central because they form the basis for going beyond time. The purpose is not to reshape the arc of history. Well, that is also part of thing, but that's not the primary thing. So insights and values means, okay, in the past people lived. What can we learn from their lives? What did they learn that we can learn? So insights and values become central. Because if I can know those insights and values, then I can also transcend history. So if the movement is this way, then the historical progression matters. The movement is this way, and the specific historical events historical precision doesn't matter. The living matters. How did a person live? And actually, this obsession with facts and figures is a very post-Newtonian aspect of the approach to history. Previous to Newton, if you consider, say, most of the books, even if you look at Greek history written, when all these histories were written, there was no huge debate. Was this exactly accurate or not? It was not considered very important. Okay, it might be accurate. What are the values to be learned? What are the lessons to be learned? It was not that stories were made up, but the point is, the values were more important. And this lacking is what one famous historian commented, that the most important thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. That we learn nothing from history. Meaning that humans keep doing the same mistakes again and again and again and again. So another consequence of this is this conception of time is that there is a rigid conception rigid separation between history and historicity. Okay, this was by history what I mean. This is what is told as history. And historicity is precise historical facts and figures. Okay, this maybe this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, because we can't prove it. And this leads to rejection of much traditional history, especially in those traditions where if they had a cyclic conception of time, then they didn't really bother to document history very precisely. So this has, now each of this has a lot of consequences, but in the cyclic conception of time, the focus is on the lessons from history, not the letters of history. Not the letters of history means the literal letters. This is what happened there, this is what happened there. Exactly the precision of the historical record is not what is important. So in the Vedic tradition, there is history, but the tradition itself is not history-centric. Not history-centric. That means if we consider if Jesus had not come, there would be no Christianity. If Moses had not been there, there would be no Judaism. That why? Because those events are the very basis of what happened. They're history-centric religions. But if you consider from the Vedic tradition, say if a particular avatar had not appeared, a particular saintly teacher had not appeared. Now, of course, a lot of enlightenment might not have happened, but the principles would have remained true. So suppose in the future, now even Jiva Goswami says that much of the Vedic scripture has been lost by now. But still the essential wisdom is available, the principles are available. So the focus is always on principles, and therefore what happens is historicity is never a faith maker or a faith breaker. Oh, we can prove that Krishna actually appeared on the earth in 5,000 years ago. We can prove that Adam's bridge that is there between India and Lanka, that is actually Ramasetu. We can prove this, we can prove that actually. Okay, if you can prove it, good. But the faith of millions and millions of people is not dependent on whether you were able to prove something or not. So for what happens is, because the tradition is not history-centric, the focus is, the basis of the faith is not the historical precision. The basis of the faith is something else. So let's try to understand the basis of the faith. So we'll go to the last part now. Focus on the path beyond history, not on the path of history. So how is history shaped by the conceptions of history? So what we record linearly, precisely, factually, that becomes very important with the linear conception of time. And that is not that important with respect to the cyclic conception of time. So that's why there is not much emphasis on prophecy also. That means that in many of the Christian traditions, again, I'm not criticizing Christianity over here. I'm just using that as a reference point for contrasting. There are other classes where we can appreciate much of the devotional depth of the Christian tradition also. We're just drawing it for contrast. At least in some Christian tradition, there's been a lot of basis. Oh, second coming of Jesus is going to happen now. We are near the end days. And this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And so many times the end days have come and gone, that now anybody who predicts that the end days have come, they often become an object of ridicule and a laughing stock. So within the Vedic tradition, also there may be some descriptions of the future. But it is not that, oh, because these prophecies came true, therefore the Bhagavatam is true, and therefore we should follow it. That has practically never been the emphasis of the tradition. There are sections of prophecy in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam, and we can read them, and we can see that many of the things that are described, we can also see that they are remarkably prescient, that they are coming out to be true. But practically no traditional commentator on the Bhagavatam has ever stressed, see, these prophecies are coming true, therefore you should have faith in the Bhagavatam and follow the Bhagavatam. No. So the basis of faith is not the turning of history according to scriptures. This is what scripture told, this is what happened. It is the basis of the faith is the turning of the heart according to scripture. Turning of the heart means that if we imbibe the principles of the Bhagavatam, our heart will turn from the world toward Krishna. And that is the essence, that is the essential purpose of the Bhagavatam. And we all can see, if we study the Bhagavatam, if we try to apply its wisdom, we will experience our heart turning toward Krishna. And that is what is considered as the basis of the faith. That's why prophecies don't matter. And another consequence of this is that there is this polarity. Can you prove this? Cannot prove this. So some traditions will claim that this past is historically provable. Say, for example, many of the cities that were described in the Old Testament, modern historians, or at least many pre-modern historians, deem them as just myth. But research in around Jerusalem, Middle East, Egypt, all those places, many of those cities have been found. And they say, oh, this proves that our tradition is right. So there could be the focus, the past is historically provable, and therefore our tradition is right. And somebody else may, the past is historically disprovable. This never happened. This could not have happened. And therefore this particular scripture, its account is false. So in the Vedic tradition, it is not whether the focus is not on whether the past is historically provable or not. The focus is on that the principles are presently replicable. Those principles we can apply in our lives, and thereby we can experience transformation. Just as hearing the Bhagavatam filled Parikshit Maharaj's heart with attraction for Krishna, devotion for Krishna. Similarly, hearing the Bhagavatam can also fill our heart with devotion for Krishna. The principles are currently replicable. So therefore, when somebody gets too much into the history, is this right, is it wrong? So can you prove this? If you can't prove this, how do you believe this? Can you prove that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago? The Bhagavatam was spoken 5,000 years ago. Historians say something different. So we have to challenge the rules of the game. So if somebody asks, is this precisely historically provable? We change the question. Instead of getting into that debate, challenge the question itself. Why does it matter so much whether this is precisely historically provable? That is not the key point. That is not the key point. The key point is whether, rather than proving history, we could say it is improving spirituality, improving the consciousness of our own heart. And that becomes for the seeker the ultimate proof. So now, of course, I'm not in any way minimizing the importance of history, even by the modern historical approach. And those with the interest can definitely study and try to analyze the historical dimensions. Okay, what this particular lineage is described over there. What do we have record of history? Can we correlate this? Is it possible? Is it not possible? And we may discover a lot also by that. So, like I mentioned, near the coast of Dwarka, we have found remnants of a very advanced civilization, which does point strongly toward the historicity of Krishna. In fact, almost all academics, even academic scholars, accept that Krishna existed. The historicity of Krishna is more or less beyond debate. Even just for 40, 50 years ago, many academics were quite skeptical about the idea of Krishna ever existed. But that's changing. So that study can be helpful. But that is never the basis of the faith of serious students of the Bhagavatam or serious students of the Vedic tradition either. So those interested primarily in Krishna can focus on learning the insights and values that help us come closer to Krishna. So somebody can do specialized study, but most of us, the history doesn't matter so much. So there are some sections of the Bhagavatam we may want to read again and again and memorize. This particular section with so many lists, yes, we can read them. They're special souls. Their reference comes in the Bhagavatam. That itself makes them special. Beyond that, other Puranas might talk something more about them. That could also make them special. But this, we may not reread again and again and relish. That's fine. Some people might focus on this itself. That's also fine if that's their interest. So I'll choose your focus. So this is a quote by Srila Prabhupada, sorry. This is from the first canto, 9th chapter. He says that he is describing the path by which Krishna went from Hastinapur to Dwarka. And he says that he went by this city, this city, this city. And he says modern historians try to retrace the path. So we may leave the matter for expert geologists to research because the changing universe has different phases of geological development. We are satisfied that the Lord has now reached his own province, Dwarka Dham, from the Kuru provinces. He says in the next, subsequently, he says that now he's going to perform pastimes, and we are all looking forward to those pastimes. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So Prabhupada, in one sense, is exhibiting some amount of indifference to the mundane aspects of here is geography, but the similar thing can be applied to historical precision also. Prabhupada did not, if you see so many verses, Prabhupada has not even commented on these verses. Why? Because he is not interested in history. He's interested in the principles that can take us beyond history. So that's why we choose our focus, and following Srila Prabhupada, we focus on learning how to be Krishna conscious from the Bhagavatam. And to the extent the study of the history of the Bhagavatam helps us in enhancing our Krishna consciousness, to that extent, we can focus on it. So I'll summarize. I discussed 3 main points today. The first was that why so much history in the Bhagavatam is because the Bhagavatam is describing when the eternal, the spiritual and the material are meeting. This happens in many ways, but primarily two: avatar, and the supreme spiritual reality descends to this world, and then it's uddhar, the soul becomes liberated from this world. And then why are other incidents described at all? That is to give context, give context by contrast for how special those events are when the spiritual and the material meet. And then how do we see the history of the Bhagavatam? For that, we need to understand how the recording of history has been shaped by conceptions of history. We discuss it to some significant detail: the cyclic conception and the linear conception of time. And in the linear conception, it becomes very fact-centered. Facts and figures become very important. Whereas in cyclic conception, the insights and values that are learned, they become most important. And that's why historicity, the precise historical verification of particulars, has never been a priority of the Bhagavatam commentators or of the living tradition. So it has never been, oh, this can be proven historically, or this can't be proven historically. That has never been a faith maker or a faith breaker. So we focus neither on proving the past, that is, we focus not is it provable or disprovable, but that is the principles are replicable even today. And we don't bother so much also prophecies also. Did this come true or does not come true? The turning of history according to scripture is not as transformational as the turning of the heart according to scripture. And that is something we all can experience. So if we have special interest in history, we can study in a comparative technical sense the Bhagavatam's history and modern history. But for the rest of us who are primarily interested in Krishna, we can follow Srila Prabhupada's example that we just focus on connecting with Krishna, learn the insights and values that can help us move closer to Krishna. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Emily. Happy to give service.
There's something in the chat from Emily. Emily, would you like to read this?
Yes. Okay. So, what is the driving inclination of the individual or society for such focus on history and linear time rather than the principal and cyclical time? Why would that be more enticing to accept than the latter, other than attachment to that's what everyone believes or science proves? Yeah, it's an important question. Well, one point is that the idea of progress has become very deeply ingrained in human psyche. And in one sense, if you look at the history of evolutionary theory also, it is not that one even now among the various theories in science, there is this, if you see, one reason why evolution became so widely propagated was not just its you could say its empirical or theoretical merits. I'm not here getting into the debate of evolution, but I'm just talking about how it became so influential is its ideological context was its ideological implications really fit in. Oh, that we were microbes and they were monkeys and we become humans. That progression is going on and on and on. Now we are progressing further. So that fit into the Kali Yuga ego very nicely. So in general, in the past, or because at least before pre-modern times, generally the approach toward the past was respect. Oh, these people, they had wisdom. We should learn from them. But in many ways, now the looking at the past is not wisdom, not reverence, but sometimes a derision. Oh, these people were superstitious, they were ignorant, and they were unscientific. Yeah, there were that kind of people also. But that was not the only kind of people who existed in the past. So I would say it fits in very nicely into the narrative that is there in society. That narrative massages the human ego, and almost everything in the modern worldview is riveted toward that. And what has happened is the main religion in the world, the religion, which is the Christianity, which was also, in one sense, at least the people who pioneered most of modern progress, where in Europe and later in America. And then there's colonization which went all over the world. So that thought system that there is progression, that is quite ingrained. And at least from an external perspective, technology has advanced. And so for many people, unless they go a little deeper into looking at the values of living, looking at, say, social capital in terms of how well families are together, relationships are together, what is the psychological implication? If you don't look at that, it does appear that we are progressing. We have far better telecommunication, we have better devices. It does seem to be progressing. So it requires a capacity to see beyond superficials and think different from mainstream society to actually even consider the idea of cyclic time. Okay. So, okay, I hope that question answered. So, and there was question, and Devanta is repeating that. Why are women not mentioned as much as men in all these lists in the Vedic literature? Yeah, there are two reasons over here. Primarily, this is describing not just the list of human beings. It is primarily describing the list of kings. List of, if you see, this is a royal lineage that is being described. Basically, the dynasty is leading ultimately to the dynasty in which Krishna appeared, and other associates of Krishna, other people who present the time of Krishna appeared. So generally, in the past, it's not just in the Vedic times, most of the world, the heads of state, the rulers, were kings. And that's why the kings are mentioned. It's not always like this. If you see in some places, the king is mentioned and the queen is also mentioned. And then they said, this king and queen together, they had these many children. And then this person married this one, and then they had these children. So it is primarily in this case, actually, if you consider this, almost 1,000 years are covered in just 20-30 verses. So that's why here the description is not giving both the king and the queen. The focus is more on king. But the idea is the Vamshavali. Vamshavali means the lineages, the lineages in which this Uddhar or Avatar happened. That is the primary focus of the Bhagavatam. And quite often the lineages are described from the point of view of the king and the successor. And because those are males, so that's why the male names are much more in the Bhagavatam. Does it answer the question?
Okay, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, is it true that Jesus spent some time in India before he started preaching at the age of 33 and was trained in India in the Vedic knowledge?
Well, again, if you see the historicity has never been a particular focus in our tradition. And there are some people who write in books which try to say that Jesus came to India and he learned in India. Some people say that Jesus, there is a tomb in Kashmir which is actually said to be Jesus' tomb. And there are two narratives. One is that there are some missing years in the life of Jesus, and during those missing years, some people say he went to India and he learned from India. Now there was the Aquarian Gospel, and some versions of it. The Aquarian Gospel is not actually a part of the main canonical Gospels in Christianity, and most historians say that it is a relatively recent book. But in the Aquarian Gospel, in some versions at least, there's a mention of Jesus actually going to India. Now, Prabhupada apparently read that particular section, and in one of the lectures he quotes this also, that in the Aquarian Gospel it said that Jesus came to India. And then Ravindra Swarup Prabhu asked Prabhupada that this Aquarian Gospel, is that an authentic book? Isn't it the Gospel? Prabhupada asked, no, it's not. Just the name is like that. Oh, Prabhupada said, okay. I thought it is a Gospel. Something like that Prabhupada said. And then Prabhupada said, Prabhupada, the devotee asked, is what is said in that Gospel true? And Prabhupada just laughed and he says, that part of Jesus going to India is nice. Now, Prabhupada just used the word nice. He didn't say that it is, at least this is what I have read. Prabhupada didn't say it's true necessarily. So, in my understanding, this really doesn't, it's the historical evidence is, how should we put it? That the believers need no evidence and the non-believers accept no evidence. So it becomes like that. So I would say that we needn't spend too much time on this. For some people, reading that might increase their faith and their openness, or at least openness, if not faith, in the wisdom of the East, with the wisdom of India. And that may inspire them to read more and explore more of that wisdom. Then that is anukul. But that doesn't, Prabhupada didn't make that in any way the central plank of his outreach. That Jesus also learned from India. So that's why I don't think we need to focus too much on that. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry for this silly question, but I'm curious, what was he doing before he started preaching? It's really, really curious to me.
Sorry, come again.
I was just curious what Jesus was doing all these years before he became prominent. It's not a question. I'm just, wondering.
Yeah, actually the missing years, something must have happened. Now, of course, there are some descriptions of he fasting and he was tempted by the devil, which is there in the Gospels. But it is quite likely that he was preparing for his mission in some way, and going to India to prepare for it could be a reasonable hypothesis also. So that would be my understanding. I don't think we can speculate. Is much point in we coming to a much possibility rather of we coming to any decisive conclusion about this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bhima Prabhu, unmute yourself.
Yes, Hari. I'm coming in and out because I'm in and out of the field of material existence as well. Yes, Christ, they asked Christ one time, his father asked him when he was a boy, what were you doing in the synagogue amongst the rabbis? And says, wife, you should know I am busy with the affairs of my father, capital F. So we see that, I'm sorry, I'm out of breath here, running up from the field to the phone. We see that, in both scriptures, you have these hints, these clues, as Prabhupada tells you, that something being said in the moment might also have meaning into the future. It's like, it's an event which is metaphorical or explanative of a question that you just asked, which is, what was Christ doing? Christ was always involved with the affairs of his Father. So just like that timeline that we both have linear and cyclic time, we have the linear, and that is like Prabhupada's linear, how he grew up in Krishna consciousness, how he was given, when he was given the mission from Bhakti Siddhanta, etc. So Christ as well, it's similar in all faiths. And remember, Christ was part of the Judaic religion, and there are lovers of God within the Judaic tradition. To just read the Song of Solomon, okay? You read that or Psalms, but especially the Song of Solomon. My lover has eyes like doves. There is this love present in all religions, and we must be humble enough when we speak of other religions that we are aware that there is a reason why people are following. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Yes, of course. It's a very important comment. Our purpose is not to criticize or minimize those who are having a linear conception of history. And that's actually put also. Prabhupada also sometimes referred to the golden age, which is also Mahaprabhu's advent 10,000 years. So that could also be said to be a linear within the cyclic. Thank you. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, Vedic scientist, jai. Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for contributing to class. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be of service.
And today's Christmas Eve and we brought up Jesus. So wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Hare Krishna. Merry Christmas.